There is a book more than 600 years old, filled with writing that no one can read. There is an abandoned English colony where more than 100 people disappeared, leaving behind one strangely specific clue. Archaeologists keep finding small bronze objects made by the Romans, yet no surviving Roman text tells us what they were for. And somewhere in Mongolia may lie the grave of one of the most powerful conquerors in human history. These are not legends invented around a campfire. The manuscripts exist, the objects exist, the ruins exist, the historical records exist. What is missing are the answers. Tonight, we are looking at 4 historical mysteries that remain unresolved. Cases where enough evidence survives to make the questions real, but not enough to make the answers certain. And we begin with a book that has resisted almost everyone who has tried to understand it. Inside Yale University's Dodecahedron Book and Manuscript Library sits a handwritten book cataloged simply as MS 408. It contains roughly 240 surviving pages, covered in dense lines of unfamiliar symbols, strange botanical drawings, circular astronomical diagrams, naked human figures moving through systems of pools and pipes, and illustrations that seem to show medicines, roots, and containers. The manuscript looks as though it was created to explain something. The problem is that no one can confidently say what that something is. Today, the book is known as the Voynich Manuscript, after Wilfred Voynich, the rare book dealer who acquired it in Italy in 1912. Voynich quickly realized that he had purchased something unusual. The text did not resemble Latin, Greek, Hebrew, or any other familiar writing system, and the illustrations did little to clarify what the author was trying to communicate. Scientific testing has dated the parchment to the early 15th century, meaning that whatever the manuscript is, its physical materials genuinely belong to the medieval world. Its history before Voynich is incomplete, but one surviving letter connects it to the collection of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, a ruler known for his fascination with science, alchemy, and unusual objects. According to that account, Rudolph reportedly paid a substantial price for the manuscript, which raises an obvious question. What did he believe he was buying? For centuries, people have tried to answer that question by first solving the more fundamental one. What does the manuscript actually say? The text contains only a few dozen basic character forms, depending on how they are classified. These characters combine into repeated groups that resemble words. Certain symbols regularly appear in particular positions, while others rarely occur together. Paragraphs seem deliberately structured, and statistical studies have found patterns that look more organized than random strings of meaningless marks. In other words, the manuscript does not immediately behave like nonsense, and yet no one has successfully translated it. Cryptographers have treated it as an elaborate cipher. Linguists have searched for hidden connections to known languages. Historians have compared its images with medieval medical, astronomical, and botanical traditions. More recently, computational methods have been used to search for patterns that earlier researchers could not have detected manually. Every few years, someone seems to announce that the Voynich manuscript has finally been solved. One researcher sees a lost medieval language. Another sees coded medical information. Someone else argues that the symbols represent an artificial language created by the author. Then specialists examine the proposed solution more closely, and the certainty disappears. That is because deciphering a manuscript requires much more than finding a handful of words that appear to fit. A genuine solution has to work consistently. The same symbols must behave according to the same rules throughout the book, and the resulting text must make sense across hundreds of pages. So far, no proposed decipherment has achieved broad scholarly acceptance. There is also another possibility, and perhaps it is the most frustrating of all. The manuscript may contain nothing meaningful. Perhaps the entire thing was an elaborate hoax designed to appear mysterious and valuable to wealthy collectors. If someone knew that rulers such as Rudolph II were willing to pay extraordinary sums for rare or occult objects, a convincing fake could have been profitable. But that explanation creates its own mystery, producing hundreds of pages of structured pseudo-writing, carefully illustrated and assembled into a substantial manuscript, would have required enormous effort. And the internal regularity of the text has made many researchers reluctant to dismiss it as simple gibberish. Then, there are the illustrations. The botanical pages contain plants that seem almost recognizable, but many combine features that do not clearly match known species. The astronomical pages contain circular diagrams and zodiac-like imagery. Other sections show small human figures immersed in green pools, connected through elaborate tubes that resemble a strange biological or hydraulic system. It feels as if the manuscript should reveal its purpose if we simply stare at it long enough. It never does. That leaves us with a remarkable object, a medieval book whose physical pages survived, whose illustrations survived, and whose writing survived almost perfectly, but whose meaning may have disappeared. More than 6 centuries after it was created, we still do not know who wrote the Voynich Manuscript, what language or code it uses, or whether the words carry meaning at all. The message survived. The understanding did not. And our next mystery is almost the opposite. Instead of words without people, we have a place without its people. In 1587, a group of 117 English men, women, and children arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their goal was ambitious: establish a permanent English settlement in North America and create a community that could survive thousands of miles from home. Their governor was an artist and explorer named John White. Among the settlers was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who soon gave birth to a baby girl named Virginia. She became the first English child born in England's attempts to establish colonies in the region. For White, this was no longer simply an expedition. His daughter was here. His newborn granddaughter was here. Whatever happened to the colony would also happen to his family. And almost immediately, the settlement faced problems. Supplies were limited. Earlier English expeditions had damaged relations with some indigenous communities in the region. Food was uncertain, and the colonists knew they would need additional support from England if the settlement was going to survive. White agreed to sail home and organize new supplies. He expected to return soon. Instead, England's conflict with Spain changed everything. Preparations surrounding the Spanish Armada disrupted shipping, and vessels were redirected toward the war effort. White repeatedly tried to return to Roanoke, but his journey was delayed again and again. 3 years passed. When he finally approached Roanoke Island in August 1590, he was returning not only as governor, but as a father and grandfather who had no idea whether his family was still alive. The settlement should have been visible. It was not. White and his companions found the colony abandoned. Structures had been dismantled. There was no large group of settlers waiting for them, and there was no clear evidence that the entire population had been killed where they stood. But the colonists had left something behind. Carved into a wooden post was one word: Croatoan. The word has become one of the most famous clues in American history, but to John White it was not mysterious in the way it sounds to us today. Croatoan referred to a nearby island and to the indigenous people who lived there. More importantly, White had arranged a system with the colonists before leaving. If they relocated, they were supposed to leave a message indicating where they had gone. If they had been forced to move under dangerous circumstances, they were supposed to add a particular mark. White apparently found no such distress symbol, so the simplest interpretation seemed obvious. The colonists had moved to Croatoan. White wanted to search for them, but the weather deteriorated, anchors were lost, and his ship was unable to continue safely toward the island. The expedition turned away. White would never see his daughter, his granddaughter, or the colonists again. And because that final journey to Croatoan never happened, the mystery remained open. Over the centuries, theories multiplied. One possibility is that the colony simply failed. Tree ring evidence indicates that the region experienced severe drought during the period of English settlement. Food could have become extremely difficult to obtain. Disease, hunger, and conflict may have killed some of the colonists. But if all 117 people died on Roanoke, where were the remains? Why had the buildings been dismantled? And why leave the word Croatoan? Another possibility is that the colonists moved inland. White had discussed relocation with them before leaving, and archaeologists have uncovered European objects at sites farther west that date broadly to the appropriate period. Those discoveries are intriguing, but European goods could also have moved through trade, so individual objects do not automatically prove that members of the lost colony lived there. The Croatoan theory remains one of the strongest possibilities. Archaeologists working on what is now Hatteras Island have uncovered European material from the colonial period, and the English had previously maintained relatively friendly relations with some members of the Croatoan community. Perhaps at least some of the settlers joined them. If food was failing and no supply ship had returned from England, integration with the local community may have been one of the best chances for survival. But there is still no discovery that allows historians to reconstruct exactly what happened to all 117 colonists. And perhaps that is because the question itself is misleading. We often imagine the lost colony as a single mystery requiring a single answer. One community disappeared. Therefore, one thing must have happened to everyone. Real history is rarely that tidy. The settlers may have divided. Some could have gone to Croatoan. Others may have traveled inland. Some may have died from hunger or illness. Others may have been killed in conflict. Survivors could have joined indigenous communities and eventually disappeared from the English historical record entirely. If that happened, there may never have been one dramatic moment when the colony vanished. It may have dissolved slowly, family by family, person by person, until there was no colony left to find. More than 4 centuries later, we know where the colonists began their story. We know when John White left them. We know when he returned. And we know the clue they deliberately carved before they disappeared. Croatoan. It may have been the answer White needed, But because he never reached the island, we cannot know exactly what he would have found there. Our third mystery is smaller, small enough to hold in your hands, and somehow that makes it even stranger. The Roman Empire left behind an extraordinary amount of evidence about everyday life. We have legal documents, military records, private letters, inscriptions, recipes, engineering texts, shopping lists, and graffiti scratched into walls. We know what Roman soldiers carried. We know what people cooked with. We know what their lamps looked like, what games they played, what tools doctors used, and what coins passed through their markets. Which makes it strange that archaeologists have found an entire category of Roman object that no surviving Roman text appears to explain. They are small, hollow objects cast in bronze, usually small enough to fit comfortably in one hand. Each has 12 pentagonal faces. A circular hole is cut into the center of every face, often with different holes having different diameters. Small rounded knobs project from the corners. Today, we call them Roman dodecahedra. More than 100 examples have been discovered, particularly across the northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire. Some have been found in areas corresponding to modern Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They clearly belong to the Roman world. They were carefully manufactured. They were made repeatedly, and we still do not know what Romans used them for. The mystery has produced an enormous number of proposed explanations. Perhaps they were measuring instruments. If someone looked through two holes of different sizes, the changing apparent size of a distant object could potentially help estimate distance. That has led to theories involving surveying or military range finding. But there is a problem. The surviving dodecahedra are not completely standardized. Their dimensions vary, the hole sizes vary, and they generally lack the numerical markings we might expect from an instrument designed to produce precise measurements. Another theory suggests that the dodecahedra were connected to textile production. Modern experimenters have demonstrated that yarn can be wrapped around the corner knobs in ways that produce knitted tubes, including shapes resembling the fingers of gloves. It is an ingenious demonstration, but an object being capable of performing a task does not prove that this was its original purpose. Other proposals include candle holders, calendrical devices, astronomical instruments, gaming pieces, religious objects, and tools associated with divination or ritual practice. Some explanations sound practical, others sound speculative. None has produced enough evidence to settle the question. Then, in 2023, archaeologists discovered an unusually complete Roman dodecahedron near Norton Disney in Lincolnshire, England. The object was carefully excavated in a modern archaeological context, giving researchers a valuable opportunity to study not only the dodecahedron itself, but also the surroundings in which it had been deposited. That matters because context is often what gives an ancient object meaning. Find an unidentified tool beside a loom, and textile production becomes more plausible. Find it inside a military workshop, and another explanation becomes stronger. Find many examples in temples and ritual use, suddenly looks different. But even with new discoveries, the central question remains unresolved. What did a Roman actually do with one of these things? There is something almost more unsettling about this mystery than about a lost city. The Roman dodecahedra are not enormous monuments whose builders disappeared thousands of years before writing. They come from a literate civilization that documented astonishingly mundane details of daily life. And yet, this knowledge escaped the record. At some point, their purpose may have been obvious. A Roman could perhaps have picked one up, used it without explanation, set it down, and never imagined that anyone would need instructions. Everyone who mattered already knew. Then generations passed. The people who understood the object died. The habit disappeared, and the explanation went with them. That may be one of history's quietest forms of destruction. Nothing has to burn. No army has to invade. No library has to collapse. Sometimes knowledge disappears simply because no one thought it was necessary to preserve it. And now we move from something small enough to hold in your hand to something that may be hidden beneath an entire landscape. In 1227, Genghis Khan died while campaigning against the Western Xia kingdom. By that point, the man born as Temujin on the Mongolian steppe had transformed the political map of Eurasia. He united competing Mongol groups, built a formidable military system, and created an empire that his descendants would expand into the largest contiguous land empire in history. His armies destroyed kingdoms. His name became known from China to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. And yet, we cannot confidently point to the place where he was buried. For almost 800 years, the location of Genghis Khan's tomb has remained unknown. The mystery is surrounded by dramatic stories. Later traditions describe members of the funeral procession killing witnesses so nobody could reveal the route. Other versions claim horses trampled the burial ground until every trace disappeared. Some stories even describe a river being redirected across the site. They are memorable stories, but they should be treated as legends rather than established historical facts. The genuine evidence is more restrained and in some ways more interesting. Historical sources provide surprisingly little reliable detail about the burial itself. Genghis Khan's death was recorded, but there is no surviving contemporary description that allows archaeologists to travel to a precise location and begin digging. One place appears repeatedly in discussion of the search: Burkhan Khaldun, a sacred mountain in northeastern Mongolia, deeply connected with Genghis Khan's life and with Mongolian tradition. The wider region has long been considered a plausible area for the burial. But searching for the tomb is not simply an archaeological treasure hunt. Burkhan Khaldun is sacred. For many Mongolians, the landscape is not an empty archaeological site waiting for outsiders to excavate it. It carries cultural and spiritual meaning. Digging through such a place in search of a famous body raises questions that technology alone cannot answer. Does discovering a possible tomb automatically give us the right to open it? Modern researchers have therefore explored less invasive approaches. Satellite imagery, aerial photography, remote sensing, and other technologies have allowed investigators to study large areas without immediately disturbing the ground. These searches have identified ancient features and archaeological sites across parts of Mongolia, but none has produced evidence strong enough to establish the location of Genghis Khan's burial. And the scale of the landscape is difficult to overstate. This is not a search inside a single ruined city. Mongolia contains enormous stretches of mountains, forest, and steppe. A burial designed to blend into that environment could be remarkably difficult to distinguish even with modern technology, especially if there was never a monumental structure above it. That possibility changes how we think about the mystery. We often imagine the tomb of a conqueror as something enormous: stone chambers, gold, weapons, inscriptions, and monumental architecture. That expectation comes partly from other famous rulers, whose graves were designed to proclaim their importance. But Genghis Khan came from a very different tradition. If his burial was deliberately discreet, the most famous missing tomb in the world may not look like a tomb at all. It may simply look like Mongolia. And there is another possibility. One day, technology may become good enough to identify the burial place with reasonable confidence. Researchers may see something beneath the soil. Patterns may emerge. Evidence may accumulate. And the decision may still be made not to excavate it. If that happens, the mystery would enter a strange category. A mystery that could perhaps be solved, but remains closed out of respect. There is something fitting about that ending. Genghis Khan spent much of his life becoming impossible for the world around him to ignore. Armies carried his authority across enormous distances. His descendants ruled territories containing millions of people, and his name survived for centuries after his death. Yet his own body may rest somewhere in the landscape where his story began, without a palace, without a visible monument, and without a sign telling the world where to look. Only mountains, forest, steppe, and silence. 4 mysteries and 4 different ways for history to lose an answer. With the Voynich Manuscript, the object survives, but its meaning does not. At Roanoke, the place survived, but the people disappeared. With the Roman dodecahedra, the object survived, while the knowledge of their purpose vanished. And with Genghis Khan, the man became one of the most famous figures in history, while the location of his own grave disappeared from the record. Perhaps one day one of these questions will finally be answered. A forgotten document may surface in an archive. Archaeologists may find stronger evidence of where the Roanoke colonists went. A Roman text may be discovered that casually mentions an object we now call a dodecahedron. New technology may reveal something hidden beneath a remote Mongolian landscape. But history does not promise us complete stories. Some people died without recording what they knew. Some evidence was destroyed. Some clues are still underground. And sometimes the one piece of information everyone assumed would never be forgotten was forgotten. That is what makes unresolved history so fascinating. The answer may be gone forever, or it may already be sitting in front of us, waiting for someone to recognize it. If you enjoy exploring the parts of history that still have no ending, subscribe to Untold History, because these 4 mysteries are only the beginning.